I tell you, it really is nice to have a bigger platform up here. I thought I'd just use the music stand to preach from today because I don't want to trip over a chord. So here I am with a music stand, and I'm glad that you are here with us to worship. We are in Acts 27. We're going to start today, so if you keep your Bibles open to Acts 27. We've been following the surprising twists of God's sovereign care in the Apostle Paul's life. We've been learning what it means to live a life of peace in the middle of an empire of polarization. We've been talking about that for several weeks now. And Paul, interestingly enough, we're in chapter 27 of Acts, is where we're going to start the message. Paul has been following Jesus for about 27 years now when we come to Acts 27. And Jesus gave a reassuring word to Paul back in chapter 23 where he said, "You will go to Rome." In fact, just by the way, we're going to start a series on the book of Romans on Wednesday nights this fall. I'll be leading it here in the sanctuary at 6:30. If you'd like to come to that, we're going to study the book of Romans. This is interesting because Paul wrote the book of Romans about 3 years before he arrived in Rome, and he did it to prepare them as their pastor for this pastoral visit. He wanted to prepare them for his coming, and so here we are looking at Paul's life and the book of Romans. It all fits together. But you're going to see in this passage today that Paul is following Jesus' command to go to Rome to share the good news of Jesus Christ at the heart of the Roman Empire and be on trial before Caesar, like the Supreme Court of the Roman Empire. And Paul's going to be a witness there in the center of power. But Paul's going to be caught up in a shipwreck on the way there. That's what we're going to look at today. And so as we look at the details of this shipwreck, we're going to look at this. In fact, it's 59 verses, this passage is. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to net out the highlights of 59 verses. And I want to find out why Luke spent so much detail on this. We're going to apply it to our lives this way. If you want to write this down in your outline, surviving the shipwrecks of life. Surviving a shipwrecked life. And then, by the way, flourishing afterwards. Now, by the way, when you go through a shipwreck and you want to survive it and then flourish afterwards, you can't just decide to push a button in your life and get through it. No, what happens is your character needs to be formed. God needs to be doing a work in your life before you get to the storm. Before you go through the Job moment of your life, God is preparing you through the circumstances and how He's meeting you, how Jesus is being formed in you as a follower of Christ. And so today it's about following Jesus. When the storm is engulfing you today and your life is you feel like you're being shipwrecked today, this passage is for you. We're going to have a series of questions we're going to look at today. And these questions are meant to help you develop your devotion to Jesus Christ. And so we're going to look at this, and again, why is Luke giving such incredible detail? And here's one of the reasons. Luke uses the word "we" throughout this passage, which means Luke went through it, and he's not going to forget what he experienced. So Luke is giving you incredible detail. He's not just interviewing people who were there, he was there. The "we" sections of the book of Acts. Here's another reason why Luke pays such attention to this. It's because God is working out His plan in the midst of all sorts of misfortune, what the world would see as an accident. God has a plan, and God's at work in this fallen world. Here's another thing Luke's doing. Luke wrote the Gospel of Luke, the life of Jesus. And you'll find often in the book of Acts that as Luke is writing the Gospel of Luke, part 2, that's the book of Acts. As Luke is writing that, he's giving us parallels between the life of Jesus and the life of Paul. You're going to see these parallels in what Luke writes. For example, both Jesus and Paul went to Jerusalem, and people thought they were crazy. Both Jesus and Paul were interrogated by Roman governors. Both Jesus and Paul were apprehended by religious authorities. Jesus went to a cross and he faced judgment. Paul went to the sea, the ocean, and faced judgment. Why would we say that he faced judgment in the ocean or the sea? Here's why. Because in the Jewish mind, the sea was a place of evil and chaos. The Jewish people, the way they looked at the oceans, you see, that's where Leviathan lives. The ocean, the sea, that's what God had to separate in order for Moses to lead the people out of bondage into freedom. Because the sea is full of darkness and evil and chaos. And in the book of Revelation, we see that the sea is a place where monsters, demonic monsters, come up out from the sea. So Paul's not going to a cross. Paul is going across the sea. And the reason Paul is so confident that he can make it across that sea is because Paul believes that when Jesus Christ died on the cross, he defeated evil. And then Jesus gave him a mission and said, I want you to go through a difficult time to bring that message of hope to the place of power where there's all sorts of evil. But people there need to hear about the hope that Jesus Christ offers them in Rome. And so that's what Paul's doing. The death and the resurrection of Jesus launches our mission. That's what we're launched out by that, because we live in a world that's yearning for new life. And because you're a follower of Jesus, you have that message of new life. So look with me at Acts 27, verse 1, where it says, when it was decided that we would sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. We boarded a ship from Adramyttium, about to sail for ports along the coast in the province of Asia, and we put out to sea. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us. Now, as you keep looking in verses 3 through 8, you're going to see this detailed travelogue, and I put a map on the screen that you can take a look at. This map is not there. Wow, that's okay, that's okay. Don't worry about it, we're working on it. But there's a map that's a really good map that you would see, and that map would show you the different verses where Paul landed. Oh, here it is. It's up there now. You see, here's where they started from, right here, and they traveled this way all the way to Rome. But right here at this end of their journey, they jump. They jump to the next slide, and they're confused, and it's awful. Thank you. No, you guys are good sports back there at the sound. Thank you for doing it. You're doing great. No problem. You're doing great. But you'll see, if you're with your Bibles open, looking at the map, in 27 verse 3, he talks about a place called Sidon. Well, here's Sidon right there. That's where it's at. In verse 5, it talks about a place called Myra. Myra is out here, right there. In verse 8, it talks about a place named Fair Haven. And so we have a lot of detail about this. We're going to skip over all that, but that's just, all of this is where they were, very detailed. Luke was there. He says we. Look with me at verse 9, 27:9. It says, much time had been lost and sailing had already become dangerous because by now it was after the Day of Atonement. So Paul warned them, men, I see that our voyage is going to be dangerous and bring great loss to ship and cargo and to our own lives as well. But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and the owner of the ship. Since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. Paul says it's going to become dangerous. This is going to be great loss. This is going to be a disaster. And Paul says this. Paul's a prisoner. He has no influence. He has no power at all. He's being held as a prisoner, being taken on this cargo ship with all these goods, all this commercial goods, all this money loaded on this ship, but also prisoners and soldiers that are escorting these prisoners to Rome. And they didn't listen to what Paul had to say. He was overruled by the majority. And the majority decided it was more important to make a whole boatload of money, literally, a whole boatload of money to go to Rome and to risk this bad weather. So they did it. They made this decision. And Paul had no influence at all, but he didn't hesitate to share his wisdom. He didn't hesitate to share what it was he knew, the insights. Now, where Paul got the insight from, we don't know if it's just common sense or what it was, but Paul shared it. Maybe it was from the very wisdom of God, the hand of God on his life. But he did have a promise from Jesus that he would make it to Rome. Paul had wisdom from God. And so I'm asking you this question. Would you write this down in your outline? Am I growing in wisdom? Am I growing in wisdom? Paul had to have some courage. Paul had to assert himself as a prisoner in chains on a ship. It's the wisdom we need to ask ourselves before we get into the shipwreck storms of our life. We need to know what to say. We need to know how to say it. We need wisdom to know when to say it. We need wisdom about how we respond when nobody listens to our wisdom. And the thing is it impacts you directly. You're on that ship. This isn't just some theory. Paul is on the ship. He's got skin in the game, literally. And here's some application when it comes to this for your own life. There are times when people will not listen to your advice. You know this. And you're going to be overruled by the majority opinion. Those times will come. Now, here's the question. When you don't get your way, are you able to accept that you're not in charge? That takes wisdom. Can you accept that you're not in charge? It takes wisdom to understand that God's the only one who ultimately is running this ship. And that the people on the ship, God's ultimately in charge of them. And the atmosphere, the weather that's going to destroy this ship eventually, and it's going to destroy the cargo it carries. You're on a journey, and here's the thing is, other people's decisions really impact your life. But you're going to choose to trust God in the midst of what other people are choosing to do and their bad decisions, and you can't change it or stop it. You're just swept along in the current. It takes wisdom to handle that, doesn't it? So I ask you this question. If you're going to survive the shipwrecks of your life, are you a person growing in wisdom? Now we get to chapter 27, verse 18, the storm. Verse 18 says, we took such a violent battering from the storm that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. Verse 19. On the third day they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, the storm continued raging, and finally we gave up all hope of being saved. Now Paul speaks up in verse 21. Look at what it says in verse 21. After they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, "Men, you should have taken my advice not to set sail from Crete. Then you would have spared yourself this damage and loss. But now I urge you to," notice this, "keep up your courage. Because not one of you will be lost, only the ship's cargo will be destroyed." Verse 23, Paul says, "Last night an angel of God, to whom I belong, and whom I serve, stood beside me, and he said, 'Don't be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar. And God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you.'" Notice this in verse 25. "So keep up your courage, men," Paul says, "for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island." Would you write this down in your outline? Number 2, am I expressing hope? Am I a person that expresses hope? You can't all of a sudden just turn a switch in you and become a hopeful person to survive the storm that you're in. Hope is something you teach yourself by focusing on Jesus Christ, the words of assurance that he gives you. In this case, God spoke to Paul through an angel. God had a job for Paul to do in Rome, and Paul knew that if they stuck with him, they would all survive. And Paul expressed his faith in God. He wasn't ashamed of it. He predicted that the ship would run aground on an island. I think in terms of application, if you'd think of it this way, in terms of application, there are people around you who can be blessed by your obedience to Jesus. As you're going through a storm in life and other people are experiencing that storm with you, if you are somebody who's anchored in your faith to Jesus Christ, as you're going through whatever storm it is you're going through, when you express that hope in Jesus, it gives them courage. What does Paul say to them? Twice he says, once in verse 22 and once in verse 25, he says, "Keep up your courage." That wasn't just some self-help motivational speech. That's rooted in his relationship with God. The hope he's giving is that you can look to God and have faith in him in the middle of the storm. So whatever you're going through, other people are going through it with you. You're on a journey together, and it impacts those who are around you. Paul doesn't retreat. I think this is interesting. Paul doesn't say to himself, well, they didn't listen to me. I'm just going to be quiet. You know what? They deserve this. I'm just going to sit here on this hope. I got hope. I could say something nice. I could give them encouragement. I could say, have courage, God. But, think of how easy it would be for Paul to just say, I'm just going to be quiet because you know what? They got it coming. I know I'm going to get there. I don't know about them. He could have said that. See, Paul doesn't retreat. Here's a point of application. Paul doesn't retreat and lick his wounds because nobody listened to him. What does he do? He asserts himself again in chains, without influence or power. He asserts himself again. He finds his voice. And he doesn't keep a list of grievances. You see, sometimes we keep a list of grievances, don't we? Oh, they hurt me. And if you can see something that can give them hope, you keep quiet about it because really in your heart, you want to take vengeance. You ever heard that old phrase, to cut off your own nose, to what? Spite your face? You don't like how you look? Cut off your nose. Yeah, it'll make it better, won't it? Sometimes we do that, don't we? Are you expressing hope to survive the storm in life that you're going through? So that's the storm. Now we're going to get to the shipwreck. The shipwreck. In fact, I want to show you where the shipwreck was. Let's see if the map works. Oh, here we go. The map works. So they're going through the storm right here. This is the area they passed through with the storm. And this is the little island of Malta that they're about to land in. By the way, even today, that very bay they landed in, they called St. Paul's Bay. Look it up. And Paul is going to assert his leadership again because Paul's going to see during the storm that the Roman soldiers that are guarding them are going to try to escape and let the prisoners all die with the cargo. The soldiers are going to jump into the lifeboats and escape. And Paul says to them, no, don't do that. Stay here. And he encourages them to eat. Paul's trying to save the people who are holding him captive. Look what he says in chapter 27, verse 35. After he said this, he took some bread and he gave thanks to God in front of them all. Then he broke it and began to eat, and they were encouraged, and they ate some food themselves. See, Paul didn't try to hide his faith in the presence of his enemies. You ever heard something in the Bible like that he prepares a table for me in the presence of who? Yeah, because Jesus is your good shepherd. That even in the presence of your enemies, you can bless those who persecute you. You can pray for them. You can love them. You can live to spare them. You can show mercy to them. You can live your faith out in front of them and not be ashamed. Paul didn't hide his faith here. Imagine how easy it would have been for Paul to say, I hope they'd jump. I hope they'd get in that boat and just... He didn't do that. Paul loved his enemies. He looked out for their best interest. Paul spared their lives. What thanks does he get? You know that old saying, no good deed goes unpunished? That's true right here. Look what Paul just did for them. And now look what it says. Look at verse 42. Chapter 27, verse 42. It says, the soldiers planned to kill the prisoners to prevent any of them from swimming away and escaping. Isn't that remarkable? Paul just saved their lives. How grateful are they? Look at how they reward him. They're thinking of killing him and everybody else who's a prisoner on the ship. Now, by the way, just so you know the way the rules worked for the Roman army and the Roman soldiers, that Roman soldiers faced severe punishment, possibly death, if any prisoner escaped. Isn't that why the jailer in Philippi was going to take his own life after the earthquake? Because he thought they had all escaped? Same reason. And so Roman soldiers here are just doing what Roman soldiers are trained to do. Kill or be killed. That's as simple as that. That's how the system worked. But look what it says in verse 43. Chapter 27, verse 43. But the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life, and he kept them from carrying out their plans. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and to get on the land. Verse 44. The rest were to get there on planks or on other pieces of the ship. In this way, everyone reached land safely. So the military commander, he breaks the rules of their military training. He does the wrong thing, but he also does the right thing. Because in Paul, he realizes he has a prisoner who saves the day. Again, people are spared because of Paul's presence. Paul chose to use his influence to serve people. Would you write that down? It's a question I have for you if you want to survive the storms of your life. Here's question number 3. Am I serving others with my influence? Am I serving others with the influence God's given me? You see, not everybody here has the title of leader, whether it's at home or any place else, a volunteer organization or in the church. You don't have to have the title leader. You're an influencer. You influence people around you. Whatever the circle is, whatever the path is that you're on, you're constantly influencing people. So here's the question. How are you using your influence to serve others? Jesus did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Think of this. How many people, when you get to heaven and you find out how many people's lives were positively impacted or maybe even literally spared or saved on earth because you were following Jesus and they were swept up in that and they had no idea and you had no idea. Do you realize how important your following Jesus is here on earth? The difference it can make? When you serve others and use your influence like that? I also think about the frailty of this human body. We're so frail. Life is so fragile, isn't it? Paul took a risk. If you're going to use the influence God's given you, you're going to take a risk. Whenever you're flesh and blood and you're going to love other people and lay down maybe your life for them, you're going to take a risk. You're going to risk being vulnerable. It's an act, it's a choice. As you follow Jesus, you do that. But think about Jesus. Just think about Jesus for a moment. Jesus, in a sense, took a risk, not because he questioned the outcome, but he took a risk when he took on a human body. Here's what I mean by that. He willingly made himself vulnerable because he was fully God and he was fully man. And when he became man, when he took on human nature, when he took on flesh and blood, he made himself killable, vulnerable. By the way, that's not just the truth for us to believe in. Being vulnerable, taking obedient risks with this flesh and blood body is something for us to live, not just believe. Here's an application point for you. As you follow Jesus, sometimes the ship of your life is just torn apart by the storm that you're in. Some of you here today literally feel your life is coming apart. And you've decided you're not going to jump into the lifeboat of worldly security that the world gives you. You're going to wait to the last minute when everything you thought could never be destroyed in your life, things you thought were permanent, when they're broken to pieces and you're standing on the edge of that ship and you're looking down into the deep, dark water and God says, jump and grab something that floats. I tell you what, that image of the bits and pieces of our life floating in the storm that we're in, you know what? With your broken ship, I want you to know something. You're headed to shore because God has his hand on your life. You're following Jesus in the middle of this storm. And following Jesus is really messy. So when Jesus says that if you try to save your life, you're going to what? Lose it. But if you lose your life for my sake, Jesus says, you'll find it. Jesus says we need to pick up our cross and follow him through the waters to salvation. So I ask you this question. Are you serving others with the influence that you have? Now we're going to get to chapter 28. Chapter 28, verse 1. I call chapter 8, verses 1... Chapter 28, verses 1 through 10 is Paul's Gilligan's Island ministry. I don't know what else to call it. The skipper and Marianne, they're all there. No, they're not. It's not an abandoned island, but you're going to see the point here. Look with me at chapter 28, verse 1. It says, once safely on shore, we found out that the island was called Malta, and the islanders, see that word islanders? It's actually the word barbarians. Barbarians. Are there barbarians in your mind? Are there people you never thought you'd encounter in your life, but you're going through something right now, and now you're crossing paths with people who you thought were way out on the fringe? You'd never come across people like that, and now your life has changed, and you've gone through the shipwreck. It's been torn to pieces. You're following Jesus. You're trying to survive this shipwreck of your life, and you meet barbarians, these islanders. And what do these islanders do? Look at verse 1. What does it say? They showed us unusual kindness. Imagine that. People who you had all sorts of prejudices again, you change your mind once you meet them. That is life, isn't it? Imagine what would happen if red and blue states actually listened to each other. Imagine what would happen to our country if we stopped pursuing polarization and tried to find out what is it we have in common. Imagine what would happen. Look with me still at chapter 28, verse 1. It says they built a fire. Verse 2. It says they built a fire and welcomed us because it was raining and cold. Verse 3. Paul gathered a pile of brushwood, and as he put it on the fire, a viper, driven out by the heat, fastened itself on his hand. When the islanders saw the snake hanging from his hand, they said to each other, "This man must be a murderer. For though he escaped from the sea, the goddess of justice has not allowed him to live." Let's just stop there. Luke didn't include this by mistake. Does it sound familiar, a snake trying to derail God's plan to get to Rome? Anywhere else in the Bible sound familiar? A snake? Look at verse 5. But Paul shook the snake off into the fire and suffered no ill effects. The people expected him to swell up or suddenly fall dead. But after waiting a long time and seeing nothing unusual happen to him, they changed their minds and said he was a god. Do you know what superstitious people say? Superstitious people say, from all cultures over all times, bad things happen to bad people, good things happen to good people. That's superstition. The islanders think Paul must be guilty, but then they find out he's innocent. Do you recognize the pattern here? Tell me if you know of a man who everybody thought was guilty, who was in power, and yet was innocent. The serpent wounded his heel, but that man, Jesus Christ, crushed the serpent's head on the cross. Paul meets a city official. So apparently there's people on the island. It's not an abandoned desert island. There's a city there. There's an official there. You see that here in fall after verse 6. But in verse 8, we find out that this city official had a father who was sick in bed. Look what it says in verse 8. His father was sick in bed, suffering from fever and dysentery. Paul went in to see him after prayer, placed his hands on him, and healed him. When this had happened, the rest of the sick on the island came and were cured. Again, another parallel between the life and ministry of Jesus on earth and what Paul's going through. Jesus healed people. Paul healed people. The people are preparing for a funeral, and Paul shows up and heals him, cures him. And the word gets out to people all over the island. This is compassion on display. Would you ask yourself this question as you go through this shipwreck and surviving it? Would you write this down? Number 4, am I displaying compassion? Am I displaying compassion? Compassion to the barbarians that I meet, who I find out are so generous that when we get to verse 10 of chapter 28, these barbarians that he spent 3 months with on this island were so touched by Paul and his ministry of compassion and healing and the power of the Holy Spirit and the gospel of Jesus Christ. They're so moved by what they experience when they're around Paul that they supply Paul and all 376 people who are with him all their needs on the next voyage. That's what they did. So let me ask you this question by way of application. Are you willing to receive hospitality from a barbarian? Who's the barbarians in your mind? Who are the people that you could never imagine receiving a gift from? Do you realize that when you're abandoned on this island of suffering that you're going through right now, that the Lord may have directed you to this island? One of the reasons is so that you can have a ministry of compassion to people you never thought you would meet. When you go to get your chemotherapy treatment or radiation and you meet people who are sitting next to you or in the room next to you and you talk with them, you never thought you'd be in that chair. But look at how God is using you. Look at what's happening in the middle of the storm that's just torn your life apart. Not that they're barbarians, but you never thought you'd be there. You're the vessel. You and I are vessels. We're instruments in God's hands. And by the power of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, we breathe new creation into the hearts of barbarians. We are carrying around the life of Jesus with us. And I'm telling you what, Jesus says the gates of hell cannot stand against it. Jesus says that you can't go into a world that's too dark, that the light of the gospel cannot make a difference in. The gospel brings flourishing, guess who what? Through broken vessels like you and I. So are you displaying compassion? In chapter 28, verse 11, he arrives in Rome. And the news of Paul's arrival in Rome really excited the believers in Rome. They've heard from Paul already. He is the Apostle Paul. But more importantly to the people in Rome, the Christians in Rome who heard Paul finally landed. More importantly, he's not just Apostle Paul, he's their pastor. They're going to meet the pastor they've never met. And they're so excited to finally meet him. And so they travel. Probably the most perfect Roman highway in that time of the world is the very road that they took, approximately maybe 43 miles from Rome. Look with me at chapter 28, verse 15. It says, the brothers and sisters there had heard that we were coming, and they traveled as far as the Forum of Appius and the 3 taverns to meet us. At the sight, notice this, at the sight of these people, Paul thanked God and was encouraged. Paul thanked God and was encouraged. Paul was encouraged. It's been almost 2.5 years since Jesus gave Paul those reassuring words that, Paul, you're going to go to Rome and testify. And Paul finally is meeting the Christians that he's longed to see. And Paul received encouragement from them. Can I ask you a point of application here? Just a question. It's a thought to consider. To allow others to encourage you means that you have to stop seeing yourself as everybody else's caretaker. Do you see yourself as everybody else's caretaker? Sometimes that can be so deeply ingrained in us. Sometimes we go through seasons of life where we're taking care of the generation behind us and we're taking care of the generation ahead of us, and we never take care of ours. We never pay attention to our own walk with Jesus. In fact, when that season's done, you find it hard to receive a gift from somebody else. You find it hard to be encouraged from somebody else because you've been in this survival mode in the shipwreck you've felt you've been going through these last several years. Here we see clearly that Paul has the humility to receive encouragement from it. If you walk around your life and you keep thinking, you know what, everybody here needs me. I'm Paul. I'm the pastor. I wrote the book of Romans. And boy, they can't wait to see me. I know they're encouraged to see me. You know what Paul's saying? I need them. I need them. I need to be encouraged by them. Can you receive encouragement from other people? Would you write this down? Am I allowing others to encourage me? Am I allowing others to encourage me? This morning, this message is about who you're becoming as a follower of Jesus. And you have a series of questions there for you to review, even throughout this week, to look at. Ask yourself this: are you going to survive the shipwrecks of life that you're going through? Look at the text. Go back and read it. Because what you're becoming before you run aground will determine how you react in that storm. Let's pray. With our heads bowed and our eyes closed, just a reminder that we're going to have prayer partners at the front of the service here. And if you would like to receive prayer, you come to the front at the end of the service, and they would love to pray with you. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, you're our Savior. And it's your name that is so precious to us. Your name is the only name by which we can be saved and rescued when we feel hopeless, when we feel life is just broken, the ship of our experience to pieces. And some of us might feel today that we're just floating aimlessly, but God, you have us where you have us for a reason. And I pray that you would give us the grace, that you'd pour out your Spirit upon us so that we not only can survive the shipwreck, but we can flourish and thrive and see your kingdom grow through us. So we offer to you our fragile bodies, our fragile minds, our fragile emotions, and we ask that you have your way. Form Jesus in us, we pray. Amen.